You're in the middle of a conversation and something shifts. Someone says something. Maybe it wasn't even that big. Maybe nobody else noticed. But something in you just closes. You don't storm off. You don't argue. You don't explain what happened. You just get quieter. And then quieter. And then you're nodding and smiling and making the right sounds, but you're not really there anymore. You went somewhere else. And later, when someone asks if you're okay, you say yes. Because how do you explain that you didn't leave the room, but you left? That it wasn't dramatic, it just happened? That the silence wasn't a choice, it was the only thing left? Welcome to Cognitive Lab, where we decode the hidden bugs in human psychology. If you go quiet when things get to be too much, not out of coldness, not out of strategy, but because it's the only thing your nervous system knows how to do, subscribe. This one is for you. Here's what people get wrong about people who go quiet when they're overwhelmed. They think it's passive aggression. They think it's manipulation, the silent treatment used strategically to punish. They think it's coldness or emotional unavailability, or just a personality that doesn't let people in. And the person doing it almost never corrects them, because they've gone quiet. Here's what's actually happening. In a 2019 study on emotional regulation strategies, researchers at the University of Toronto found that people with anxious or avoidant attachment styles were significantly more likely to use what they called cognitive withdrawal under high emotional load, a process where the brain essentially reroutes internal resources away from social engagement and towards self-preservation. In plain terms, when things get too intense, the brain decides the most efficient use of its remaining capacity is to protect itself, not to communicate. It isn't coldness. It's a circuit breaker. The silence isn't a statement about how much you care. It's a signal from a nervous system that's hit its limit, and the only way it knows to manage that is to reduce inputs. Stop talking. Stop explaining. Stop the flood of incoming information long enough to process what's already there. The question, as always, is where this started. And the answer almost always traces back to one of two patterns. The first, environments where expressing overwhelm wasn't safe. Where showing that something was too much was met with dismissal, you're being too sensitive, or with escalation, where your distress became fuel for someone else's. So you learned to contain it, to go internal, to take what was happening and fold it quietly inward where it couldn't cause any more damage. The second, environments where you were the person who held things together, where you learned early that your emotional reactions had consequences for the people around you, that when you fell apart, things fell apart. So you built a system, and the first rule of that system was, when it gets to be too much, disappear. Not physically, just enough that no one needs anything from you for a while. Developmental psychologist Mary Main, in her landmark research on attachment patterns, identified what she called deactivating strategies, a set of learned behaviors in which the nervous system suppresses attachment needs in order to maintain proximity to caregivers who were emotionally unavailable. In other words, children who learn that needing too much drives people away don't stop needing. They learn to hide it. And one of the most efficient ways to hide it is silence. You didn't choose to go quiet. You learned that quiet was the safest place to be. Here's what's actually happening neurologically when you go quiet, and why it feels so complete, so total. Think of your nervous system as a city's power grid. Under normal conditions, everything runs: social processing, language centers, emotional regulation, executive function, all online, all running simultaneously. When the load spikes, an intense conversation, an unexpected conflict, an accumulation of smaller things that finally tips over, the grid starts shedding load. Non-essential systems go offline first. And for a brain calibrated to protect itself through withdrawal, the first thing to go offline is outward communication. Neuroscientist Stephen Porges, in his Polyvagal theory, describes this as a shift from the ventral vagal state, the social engagement system, into the dorsal vagal state, a primitive shutdown response that evolved as a last resort survival mechanism. It's the same system that makes animals go limp when caught by a predator. In humans under emotional overwhelm, it produces a quieter version of the same thing: stillness, withdrawal, disconnection. You go quiet because your nervous system has switched from engage to conserve. And the most disorienting part? From the inside, it doesn't always feel like distress. Sometimes it feels like relief. Like finally, the noise stopped. Here's the cost that I don't think gets talked about enough. The people around you don't know what your silence means. And in the absence of information, people construct narratives. A 2017 study in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships found that when one person in a close relationship withdrew during conflict, regardless of the reason, the other person almost universally interpreted it as rejection, contempt, or deliberate punishment. Not as overwhelm. Not as self-protection. Rejection. So the very mechanism you use to protect yourself from too much emotional intensity ends up generating more of it, because the people around you are hurt, confused, now pushing harder for a response you don't have the capacity to give. The silence that was supposed to reduce inputs ends up multiplying them. And there's a second cost that's more internal. When you consistently route your overwhelm inward, contain it, compress it, close it off, it doesn't resolve. It accumulates. And a nervous system that has been on quiet for a long time doesn't just come back online smoothly when you want it to. The capacity to communicate what's inside gets harder to access. Not because you don't feel it, because the pathway between the feeling and the words has been bypassed so many times it starts to feel almost inaccessible. 3 things, and I want to be clear, these aren't about becoming someone who doesn't go quiet. They're about working with the pattern rather than fighting it. 1. Name it before it happens. The shutdown is fast. But there's usually a window, a few seconds before full withdrawal, where you can feel it coming. A specific physical sensation, tightening in the throat, a kind of flattening behind the eyes, the sense of the room getting slightly further away. If you can learn to catch that window, you can say one sentence before the silence closes, "I need a few minutes." Not an explanation. Not an apology. Just a signal that buys you the space the nervous system is trying to create anyway, but without the ambiguity that causes the other person to panic. 2. Separate processing from communicating. Your brain goes quiet because it needs to process. Honor that, but consciously. Give yourself a designated window, 20 minutes, an hour, however long the nervous system actually needs. And then return. Not necessarily with the answer, not necessarily with everything resolved, but with presence. Research on the approach avoidance conflict in emotion regulation, particularly the work of James Gross at Stanford, shows that suppression of emotional expression doesn't reduce emotional experience. It amplifies it. The feeling doesn't go away when you go quiet. It goes underground. The goal isn't to stop going quiet. The goal is to come back. 3. Give people a language for your silence. Not in the moment, after. When you're back. When I go quiet like that, it's not about you. It's not punishment. It means I've hit a limit and I needed to find the floor again. One conversation, done once, in a calm moment, changes the entire framework for everyone around you. They stop interpreting your silence as rejection. You stop feeling guilty for needing it. Here's what I want you to take from this. Your silence was never nothing. It was always something. A nervous system doing the most intelligent thing it had available to it, with the resources it had, in conditions that often didn't give it many options. The people who misread it as coldness didn't have the information they needed. And most of the time, neither did you, because nobody gave you the language for what was actually happening inside you when the quiet came. So here's the language. You don't go quiet because you don't care. You go quiet because you care so much and feel so much that sometimes the only way to keep it from flooding everything is to find a still place inside and wait. That's not emotional unavailability. That's a nervous system that learned to survive by going underground and is still waiting for permission to come back up. Next week, we're going to look at something that happens in the same brain, just in a different mode. Why some of the people who go the most quiet also have the loudest inner world. And why they talk to it out loud. Drop a comment. Tell me what your silence feels like from the inside. I read every one. Subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one.